What happens when Franklin Richards, one of Marvel's most powerful reality warpers, suddenly enters the world of My Hero Academia? After being transported into the middle of UA High's entrance exam, Franklin immediately shocks everyone with an ability unlike any Quirk they have ever witnessed. While Midoriya is fascinated and Bakugo sees a new rival, UA's teachers begin questioning just how powerful this mysterious new student really is. But Franklin's arrival has also attracted the attention of All for One, who sees his incredible power as something worth pursuing. What happens when a boy capable of rewriting reality enters a world built around quirks and heroes? Let's begin. The multiverse does not usually whisper. It screams in the language of collapsing stars and the grinding of tectonic plates between dimensions. For Franklin Richards, the son of Reed and Sue Storm, the noise had become a constant, deafening background hum. He had spent his young life creating pocket universes under his bedsheets and reviving dead suns with a casual thought. But the weight of being a god in a world of mere heroes was a lonely burden. He wanted a place where the fantastic was the baseline, a world where his sheer impossibility wouldn't make him a freak, but just another face in a crowded room. In a moment of subconscious longing, Franklin reached out and touched the fabric of the great tapestry, tugging a loose thread. The reality of the Marvel Universe folded, and with a silent, blinding flash of blue energy, the heir to the Richards legacy vanished, leaving only a faint scent of ozone and the echo of a child's wish. He didn't wake up in a vacuum. He woke up to the smell of hot asphalt and the sound of grinding gears. Franklin blinked, his eyes adjusting to a sky that was the wrong shade of blue, crisper, more vibrant, like an animation. He was standing in the middle of a sprawling, simulated city, surrounded by teenagers in tracksuits. To his left, a boy with messy green hair was trembling, looking up in sheer terror. Above them, a shadow fell that should have belonged to a mountain. The zero-pointer, a mechanical titan the size of a skyscraper, roared as it crushed buildings beneath its tread, its red sensors locking onto the stragglers of the UA high school entrance exam. Franklin didn't feel fear. He felt a strange, grounding sensation. His cosmic awareness, usually a roaring ocean of data, had been narrowed by his own mind into a sharp, focused stream. He looked at the robot and didn't see an indestructible machine. He saw a collection of atoms that were being very loud and very rude. Without thinking, he raised a hand. He didn't fire a cosmic bolt or tear a hole in space. Instead, he simply decided that the robot should be elsewhere. The air around the zero-pointer rippled, turning a soft, iridescent violet. Then, with a sound like a soap bubble popping, the multi-ton machine simply ceased to be. It didn't explode. It wasn't crushed. It was just gone, replaced by a gentle breeze that carried the scent of spring flowers. In the observation room, the pro-heroes of UA sat in stunned silence. Principal Nedzu's tea sat forgotten, his paws frozen mid-air. Eraserhead, usually the picture of stoic boredom, had his eyes wide, his hair beginning to float as his quirk activated instinctively. "Check the registry again," Nedzu commanded, his high-pitched voice strained. "Name, Franklin Richards. Age, 14. Origin, transfer student from New York. What is his quirk? I need a classification." "It's not on the list," Midnight whispered, staring at the screen where Franklin was now helping the green-haired boy to his feet. "We've seen emitter types, transformation types, but that wasn't an attack." He didn't destroy the robot. He edited it out of reality. Franklin, meanwhile, was experiencing something he hadn't felt in years, the sensation of being tired. His subconscious, in an effort to integrate him into this new world, had built a set of metaphorical fuses within his mind. In this universe, power had a cost, a biological limit known as the quirk factor. By forcing himself to play by the rules of this reality, Franklin had inadvertently capped his own potential at 80%, tethering his godhood to his physical stamina. Every time he rewrote a law of physics, he felt a phantom ache in his chest, a reminder that even in a world of heroes, there was no such thing as a free lunch. "Are you okay?" Franklin asked, offering a hand to Izuku Midoriya. Izuku stared at him, his eyes glistening with tears and awe. You just... Without even a support item. Who are you?" Franklin smiled, a genuine small thing. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the son of the smartest man on Earth or the herald of a new age. He felt like a kid. "I'm Franklin. I think I'm in the right place." The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. Franklin stood amidst the rubble, watching as the other students gathered around, their voices a cacophony of questions and admiration. He saw a boy with explosions crackling in his palms glaring at him with a mix of fury and fascination. He saw a girl with gravity-defying fingertips looking on in wonder. This was it. The world where the extraordinary was ordinary. But as Franklin looked up at the UA monitors, he felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. Somewhere, deep in the shadows of this world's underworld, a man with no face but 1,000 stolen powers had felt the ripple of the Zero-Pointer's disappearance. To all for one, Franklin Richards wasn't a student. He was a banquet. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. The galaxy is worth fighting for. Franklin's journey into the heart of Hero Society had begun not with a bang, but with a quiet correction of reality. As the results were tallied, Franklin's name sat at the very top of the list, boasting a score that shouldn't have been possible. He had 0 villain points, because he hadn't defeated any robots, but his rescue points were off the charts. Every student he had passed, every minor injury he had healed with a subconscious thought, and the sheer impossibility of the Zero-Pointer's removal had forced the faculty's hand. During the first week of classes, the atmosphere in Class 1A was electric. The big three of the freshman class were quickly identified: the brooding genius Shoto Todoroki, the explosive Katsuki Bakugo, and the mysterious American Franklin Richards. Franklin tried his best to blend in, wearing the gray blazer with a sense of pride that bordered on the absurd. He sat behind Midoriya, watching the boy scribble furiously in his hero notebook. "Richards-kun," Midoriya whispered, turning around during a break. "I've been thinking about your quirk. I'm calling it spatial sovereignty for now, but that doesn't fit. You didn't move the air, and you didn't use telekinesis. It's like the world just agreed with you. Is it a luck-based quirk, or is it something related to manifestation?" Franklin leaned back, his hands behind his head. "Let's just call it reality emitter, Izuku. I think of something, and if I want it badly enough, it happens. But it makes my head hurt if I go too big." "Reality emitter," Midoriya muttered, his pen blurring across the page. "The energy requirements for that would be astronomical. You'd need a massive caloric intake, or perhaps a connection to a secondary dimension." "Hey, Four Eyes!" Bakugo's voice cut through the room like a serrated blade. He slammed a hand onto Franklin's desk, smoke rising from his palm. "I don't care where you came from or what kind of flashy trick you pulled at the exam. You're just another extra in my story. Don't think you can look down on me with that calm face." Franklin looked up at Bakugo. He had faced Galactus. He had stared into the eyes of Celestials, who viewed entire galaxies as petri dishes. Bakugo's aggression was cute by comparison. It was grounded, human, and intensely passionate. "I don't look down on you, Bakugo. I actually think your explosions are incredible. The way you use the nitroglycerin in your sweat to create localized pressure waves. It's brilliant." Bakugo blinked, his anger momentarily derailed by the sincere compliment. "Of course it is. Just stay out of my way." The classroom door slid open, and a yellow sleeping bag slumped onto the floor. Shota Aizawa, the man Franklin knew as Eraserhead, peered out with bloodshot eyes. "If you're here to make friends, go to the cafeteria. This is the hero course." He stood up, shedding the sleeping bag like a snake's skin. "Put these on. We're going outside for a quirk apprehension test." As the class filed out, Franklin felt a surge of excitement. This was the structure he craved. He wanted to be tested, not as a god, but as a student. He didn't know that Aizawa had already been briefed by Nedzu. The mission was simple: find the limit of Franklin Richards, find the point where the boy stopped being a hero and started becoming a threat to the fundamental laws of the universe. The PE grounds of UA High were bathed in the mid-morning sun, the air thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and the nervous sweat of 19 teenagers. Shota Aizawa stood with his clipboard, his gaze lingering on the 20th student, the anomaly. Franklin Richards stood at the back of the pack, looking remarkably ordinary in his blue and white gym uniform. He wasn't glowing with cosmic fire. He wasn't hovering 3 inches off the ground. He just looked like a boy trying to remember if he'd tied his sneakers tight enough. Aizawa clicked his pen, his mind racing through the files Nedzu had shared that morning. The Richards file was mostly blank, a series of redacted entries and question marks that would have made a seasoned detective weep. "The 50-meter dash is first," Aizawa announced, his voice a flat, tired rasp. "Ida, Asui." "You're up?" Franklin watched as Tenya Aida blasted across the track in 3.04 seconds, his calf engines roaring. He saw the sheer physical effort, the way the boy's body was a finely tuned machine built for a single purpose. When it was Franklin's turn, he stood at the starting line next to a girl named Momo Yaoyorozu. He took a deep breath. He didn't want to fly. He didn't want to teleport. He wanted to run. But as the starting pistol cracked, Franklin's subconscious Quirk logic kicked in. He didn't just move his legs. He subconsciously decided that the distance between point A and point B was a suggestion rather than a law. To the observers, it looked like a glitch in a video game. Franklin took 2 steps, his feet barely touching the ground, and suddenly, he was across the finish line. The timer chirped. 0.01 seconds. "Richards," Aizawa called out, his brow furrowing. "What was that? Did you use a teleportation quirk?" Franklin rubbed the back of his neck, feeling a strange heat behind his eyes. "No, sir. I tried to get there as fast as I could. I think I might have accidentally shortened the track." "You shortened the track," Aizawa repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "You didn't move faster. You made the world smaller." "That's not a speed quirk, kid. That's a violation of spatial geometry." The test continued, and with each event, the tension in the air ratcheted tighter. For the standing long jump, Franklin didn't jump. He simply decided the sandpit was a more comfortable place to stand. For the grip strength test, the machine didn't just break. It turned into a bouquet of origami cranes. Franklin looked horrified at the paper birds, his face flushing crimson. "I'm sorry. I was thinking about my mom's hobby." Bakugo was vibrating with a silent, explosive fury. He had spent his entire life being the pinnacle of power, the prodigy, who would surpass All Might. But Franklin Richards wasn't just powerful, he was nonsensical. He was a walking contradiction to the very idea of hard work and quirk training. "Finally," Aizawa said, holding up a softball, "the ball throw." "Uraka, you're first." Ochako Uraraka stepped into the circle, touched the ball with her fingertips, and sent it sailing into the stratosphere. The device in Aizawa's hand beeped, displaying the infinity symbol. The class cheered, a moment of genuine levity in the face of Aizawa's grueling curriculum. Then, Aizawa turned to Franklin. "Your turn, Richards. And this time, try to keep the ball in this dimension." Franklin stepped into the circle. He felt the weight of the ball, the texture of the leather. He looked at the sky. He knew what was expected of him. He needed to show output. He took a winding pitch, his arm blurring. But as he threw, he felt a sudden sharp pressure in his mind. The fuses he had built were straining. The world around him began to shimmer, the colors of the grass and sky bleeding into a surreal, kaleidoscopic swirl. Suddenly, the shimmering stopped. Franklin felt a cold, hollow sensation wash over him, as if a vital organ had been momentarily removed. He looked up to see Aizawa, his hair floating, his eyes glowing a fierce, bloodshot red. The teacher's quirk, erasure, was active. The ball left Franklin's hand with the clumsy, weak arc of an unathletic middle schooler. It landed barely 10 feet away with a pathetic thud. The silence that followed was absolute. Franklin stared at his hands, his breath coming in shallow gasps. For the first time in his life, he was empty. There was no cosmic hum, no vibration of atoms, no whisper of the multiverse. He was just a boy. He was, for a fleeting moment, quirkless. Aizawa blinked, his hair falling back to his shoulders. He rubbed his eyes, leaning heavily on his capture scarf. "So," he muttered, loud enough for only Franklin to hear, "I can stop you. That's good to know. But I felt it, Richards. When I looked at you, I didn't just see a quirk factor. It felt like I was trying to put a blindfold on a hurricane. My head is killing me." "It felt quiet," Franklin whispered, his eyes wide. "Thank you, Mr. Aizawa." The teacher paused, surprised by the gratitude. "Don't thank me yet. Go sit down." Later that afternoon, while the students were in their foundational heroics classes, the faculty of UA gathered in the highly secured war room. On the central screen, a diagnostic of Franklin's performance was being analyzed by a specialized AI. Principal Nedzu sat at the head of the table, his small paws steepled. All Might, in his diminished form, sat in the corner, his skeletal face etched with a rare look of genuine concern. "We have a problem," Nedzu began. "According to the Quirk registry, a quirk is a biological function, an evolution of the human body. But what Franklin Richards displayed today isn't biological." "Recovery girl? You examined his blood work?" The diminutive healer nodded, her expression grim. "His DNA is fluctuating. It's human, yes, but it's as if his cells are constantly being rewritten by his own consciousness. He doesn't have a quirk factor in the traditional sense. He has a direct interface with reality itself. If we categorize him as an emitter, we're lying to the public. If we categorize him as a god, we're inviting a panic." "He's just a boy, Nedzu," All Might wheezed, coughing into a handkerchief. "I saw him with young Midoriya. He wants to help. He wants to be a hero. The boy is terrified of his own shadow." "He should be," Aizawa interjected, leaning against the back wall. "When I used erasure on him, the local reality stabilized. Do you know what that means? It means that when his quirk is active, the world around him is actually unstable. He's not just a student, he's a walking quirk singularity. If he loses control, if he gets angry or scared enough, he won't just break a building, he might accidentally delete the city of Musutafu from the map. Which is why he must stay at UA," Nedzu said firmly. "We are the only ones who can provide the structure he needs. But we must be careful. If the League of Villains, or worse, All for One, finds out that there is a child who can rewrite the rules of existence, the war for the future won't be about heroes and villains anymore. It will be about who gets to hold the pen that writes reality." Franklin, unaware of the debate, sat on the roof of the dorms that evening, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. He held a small plastic cup of water in his hand. He focused, not on the water, but on the idea of the water. Slowly, the liquid began to freeze, not into ice, but into a perfect, miniature sculpture of a soaring phoenix. It glowed with a soft, internal light before melting back into the cup. He was being watched. From the shadows of the doorway, Izuku Midoriya watched the display with a mix of terror and inspiration. He looked at his own scarred hands, thinking of the one-for-all power coiled within him like a sleeping dragon. He realized then that he and Franklin were two sides of the same coin, boys gifted with the power of titans, trying desperately to remain human in a world that wanted them to be symbols. The bus ride to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ, was supposed to be a standard milestone in a hero student's education. For Franklin Richards, it was a lesson in social dynamics he hadn't known he was missing. Sitting in the cramped, vibrating space of the bus, he felt the casual camaraderie of Class 1A swirling around him. To his left, Tsuyu Asui was observing him with her finger to her chin, her large, honest eyes unblinking. "Richards-chan," she said, her voice a blunt, rhythmic croak. "I'm usually very straightforward. Your quirk is flashy and powerful, like Todoroki's or Bakugo's, but it feels different. When they use their powers, I can see the source. Ice, fire, explosions. When you use yours, it's like the world just glitches. It's a bit scary, Ribbit." Franklin looked down at his hands. "I'm still figuring it out, Asui. Before I came to UA, people told me my imagination was my greatest strength. Here, I'm trying to make sure it isn't a weakness. Your quirk is basically a cheat code, isn't it?" Denki Kaminari chimed in from across the aisle, grinning. "I mean, if you can just decide things happen, why even train? You could just decide you're the #1 hero and go get a burger." "It doesn't work like that," Franklin replied, a shadow of a memory from his father, the smartest man in another world, flickering in his mind. "Power without understanding is just a disaster waiting to happen. If I decided I was #1, without the experience to back it up, I wouldn't know what to do when someone actually needed me. I'd be a statue, not a hero." The bus came to a halt in front of a massive domed structure. As the students filed out, they were met by the space hero, 13. The facility was breathtaking, a sprawling landscape of simulated disaster zones, from shipwrecks to landslides. 13 began a lecture on the nature of quirks, emphasizing that many of their powers were capable of killing if misused. Franklin listened intently, feeling the weight of the fuses in his mind. He wasn't just worried about killing a villain, he was worried about accidentally rewriting the biology of his classmates. "Now then," Aizawa said, stepping forward as the lights within the dome began to flicker. Let's begin the... He stopped. The air in the center of the USJ began to warp, swirling into a jagged, ink-black void. A cold, unnatural wind whipped through the facility, carrying the scent of decay. Franklin's cosmic senses, even muffled as they were, screamed a warning. This wasn't a simulation. The reality of the USJ was being punctured by a foreign intent. A hand emerged from the darkness, followed by a man covered in severed, pale hands. Tomura Shigaraki stepped into the light, his eyes darting around with a frantic, predatory energy. Behind him, a massive, obsidian-skinned creature with an exposed brain and bird-like beak loomed, the Nomu. 13! Protect the students! Aizawa shouted, his goggles snapping into place. Those are real villains. Wait, Mr. Aizawa! Midoriya cried out. There are dozens of them. You can't take them all alone. A hero always has more than one trick up his sleeve, Aizawa replied, diving into the fray. The class was immediately thrown into chaos, as Kurogiri, the Warp Gate villain, scattered them across the different zones. Franklin felt the world tilt, a familiar sensation of dimensional displacement, but he fought it. He didn't want to be sent away. He anchored himself to the ground, his will acting as a literal weight against the Warp Gate's pull. He grabbed the collars of Midoriya and Asui just as they were about to be sucked in, pulling them back into the central plaza. Richards, what are you doing? Midoriya gasped, his feet skidding on the pavement. We aren't leaving him, Franklin said, his voice dropping an octave, echoing with a faint, crystalline resonance. He looked down at the plaza where Aizawa was being overwhelmed. The Nomu had moved with a speed that defied the laws of physics, pinning the teacher to the ground. The sound of Aizawa's arm snapping echoed through the dome like a gunshot. For the first time in this world, Franklin felt a cold, jagged spike of anger. In the Marvel universe, conflict was often grand. Energy blasts, flying capes, and cosmic monologues. Here, it was visceral. He saw the blood pooling under Aizawa's face. He saw the sadistic glee in Shigaraki's eyes. I'm going down there, Franklin said. No! Richards, wait! Midoriya reached out, but Franklin was already moving. He didn't run, he simply stepped, and with each step, the distance between him and the Nomu collapsed. He appeared 10 feet away from the creature. Shigaraki turned, his chapped lips peeling back into a grin. Oh? One of the brats wants to play? You're the one Sensei mentioned. The universal Quirk. Nomu, break him! The Nomu screeched, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the bone. It launched itself at Franklin, a blur of muscle and malice. Midoriya screamed a warning, but Franklin didn't move. He raised his left hand, and for a split second, the blue and white gym uniform he wore seemed to shimmer, turning into a suit of unstable molecules from a life he had forgotten. The Nomu's fist, capable of shattering All Might's ribs, hit an invisible wall 6 inches from Franklin's face. The impact created a shockwave that shattered the concrete beneath them, sending a cloud of dust into the air. But Franklin didn't budge. He wasn't using a shield, he had simply decided that, in this 6-inch space, the concept of impact did not exist. You're hurting him, Franklin said, looking at the broken form of Aizawa. He's a good teacher. He's trying to protect us. Franklin's eyes began to glow with a soft, terrifying white light. He reached out and touched the Nomu's chest. The creature, designed with shock absorption and super regeneration to be the perfect anti-symbol of peace, froze. It wasn't a physical restraint. Franklin was reaching into the Nomu's messy, artificial biology. He saw the spliced DNA, the forced quirks, the agony of a soul overwritten by science. This is wrong, Franklin whispered. He didn't erase the Nomu. That would have been too easy, and perhaps too dangerous for the local reality. Instead, he performed a correction. With a pulse of iridescent energy, he reverted the Nomu's cells to a state of biological inertia. The creature didn't die, it simply became a statue of flesh, its heart stopping not out of trauma, but because Franklin had decided its function was over. Shigaraki's eyes widened behind the hand on his face. What did you do? Nomu! Kill him! Kill him now! The Nomu didn't move. It couldn't move. It was no longer a weapon. It was a monument to Franklin's displeasure. Your turn, Franklin said, turning his gaze toward Shigaraki. But the strain was mounting. The fuses in Franklin's mind were glowing red-hot. The sky inside the USJ dome began to crack. Literal fissures of purple light appearing in the artificial atmosphere. The ground began to vibrate with a frequency that made the students' teeth ache. By stopping the Nomu so completely, Franklin had pushed against the Quirk logic of this universe too hard. The Quirk singularity was beginning to hum in the air around him. "Richards, stop!" Aizawa's voice was a wet, pained wheeze. He looked up from the ground, his one good eye desperate. "If you keep going, you'll take the whole building with you. Control it." Franklin froze, the white light in his eyes flickering. He saw the terror on the faces of his classmates. Even Bakugo looked pale. He realized then that he was the monster in the room. He wasn't a hero saving them. He was a god accidentally crushing them with his protection. He took a deep breath, pulling the energy back in, swallowing the cosmic fire. The fissures in the sky faded, and the ground stilled. But the effort left him drained, his knees buckling. "Cheat code, indeed," Shigaraki hissed, though his voice wavered. "Kurogiri, we're leaving! This brat is a glitch! We need to tell Sensei!" As the villains vanished into the black mist, the heavy doors of the USJ burst open. All Might stood there, his silhouette framed by the sun, but for once, the students weren't looking at the symbol of peace. They were all staring at the boy in the middle of the plaza, standing over a frozen titan, looking like he wanted to apologize to the universe for existing. The aftermath of the USJ incident left UA High in a state of hypervigilance, but for the students of Class 1A, the trauma was quickly superseded by the announcement of the world's biggest stage, the UA Sports Festival. For Franklin Richards, the festival was a terrifying prospect. It was one thing to manifest a paper crane in a private classroom, or stop a villain in a secluded dome. It was another entirely to broadcast his reality-shattering abilities to a global audience. The world was still buzzing with rumors about the glitch student, who had paralyzed a Nomu with a touch, and Franklin felt the weight of millions of eyes before the cameras even turned on. Richards. Franklin turned in the hallway to find Shoto Todoroki standing behind him, his expression as cold as the frost creeping up the wall beside him. The dual Quirk prodigy looked at Franklin not with the explosive curiosity of Midoriya or the feral rage of Bakugo, but with a clinical, detached intensity. "During the USJ, you didn't fight like a hero," Todoroki said, his voice flat. "You fought like an inevitability. My father, Endeavor, has been talking about you. He thinks you're the first real threat to his legacy. But I see what you're doing. You're holding back. You're trying to look human." Franklin leaned against a locker, a faint, sad smile on his face. "I am human, Shoto. My dad used to tell me that just because you can see the end of the book doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy the chapters in the middle. I'm just trying to live the chapters." "In this world, power is a hierarchy," Todoroki countered, his left side sparking with a hint of heat he quickly suppressed. "I will win this festival using only my right side to prove a point to my father. But to beat you, I might have to acknowledge that some walls can't be climbed." "I'm going to break you, Richards. Not for my father, but to see what's actually underneath that average student mask you wear." The day of the festival arrived with the roar of 100,000 fans in the UA Stadium. The air was thick with the scent of popcorn, sweat, and the ionized hum of high-tier quirks. As Present Mike's voice boomed over the speakers, Franklin stepped onto the grass, feeling the vibration of the world. To his cosmic senses, the stadium wasn't just a building. It was a focal point of human emotion, a knot of expectation that threatened to unravel his self-imposed limits. The first event, the obstacle race, was a chaotic blur. Todoroki immediately froze the ground, pinning most of the competitors, but Franklin didn't even look down. He didn't fly. That would be too conspicuous. Instead, he subconsciously persuaded the ice to be frictionless, only for his shoes. He slid across the frozen track like a puck on air, his hands in his pockets. When the massive Robo-Infernos blocked the path, he didn't blast them. He simply walked through them. To the cameras, it looked like a phasing quirk. In reality, Franklin was temporarily making himself uninteractable with anything made of metal. "Look at Richards go!" Present Mike screamed into the microphone. "He's not even breaking a sweat. Is his quirk polite movement? The obstacles are literally moving out of his way." Franklin finished the race in third place, intentionally trailing behind Midoriya and Todoroki. He didn't want the spotlight, he wanted the data. He was watching how the others used their quirks. the way Midoriya's bones strained under the pressure of One for All, the way Bakugo used his explosions for trajectory rather than just destruction. It was beautiful. It was a dance of biological limits. The cavalry battle followed, and Franklin found himself a pariah. No one wanted to team up with the boy who could glitch the world, except for a few. He ended up with Mezo Shoji and Fumikage Tokoyami. "Your presence is overwhelming," Tokoyami muttered, dark shadow peeking out from his cloak, looking visibly intimidated. "It is like standing next to an open window in the middle of a void." "I'll keep the shutters closed, I promise," Franklin said, placing a hand on Shoji's shoulder. During the battle, Franklin acted as the ultimate defensive anchor. He didn't steal headbands with his mind. Instead, he created a probability buffer around his team. Every time Bakugo or Todoroki tried to strike, their hands would slip, or their quirks would flicker for a millisecond, just enough to miss. It was subtle enough that most attributed it to luck or the chaos of the fray, but Aizawa, watching from the announcer's booth, narrowed his eyes. He knew that luck didn't happen that consistently. Finally, the tournament phase began. Franklin cruised through the initial rounds, using the bare minimum of his power to nudge his opponents out of bounds. He made the floor feel like a treadmill, moving in reverse, for one student. For another, he made their own cape feel like it weighed 500 pounds. He was playing a dangerous game of ordinary, but the mask was slipping. The quarterfinals brought him face-to-face with Shoto Todoroki. The atmosphere in the stadium shifted the moment they stepped into the ring. The crowd went silent. Even Endeavor stood up in the VIP section, his flames burning a fierce, expectant orange. Todoroki started the match with a localized glacier, a wave of ice so massive it threatened to bury the entire ring. Franklin didn't move. He raised a finger, and as the ice touched him, it didn't shatter. It sublimated. It turned directly into a thick, obscuring mist. Within the white fog, Franklin walked toward Todoroki. "You're still using only your right side," Franklin's voice echoed, seemingly coming from all directions at once. "You're fighting your father, not me. But Shoto, I know what it's like to have a father whose shadow covers the world. I know what it's like to feel like you're just a tool in someone else's lab." Todoroki lunged through the mist, his right side encased in frost. "You know nothing. This power is his curse." Franklin caught Todoroki's frozen fist with a bare hand. The ice didn't burn him. It felt like room temperature. No, the power is just energy. Atoms moving fast or slow. It doesn't have a name until you give it one. You're trying to win a fight by tying one arm behind your back, but the world is too heavy for that. If you want to beat a god, Shoto, you have to at least be a whole man. Franklin let a fraction of his true self leak out. The air around them began to hum with a low tectonic vibration. The mist began to glow with a soft, bioluminescent blue. Todoroki felt it then, the sheer, crushing scale of the boy before him. It wasn't just a quirk. It was as if he were standing on the surface of a sun that was trying very hard to pretend it was a candle. "Show me," Franklin whispered. "Show me who you are when you aren't afraid of your own blood." Todoroki's left side erupted. The heat was so intense it instantly cleared the mist, sending a pillar of fire spiraling into the sky. The crowd roared, a wall of sound that shook the foundations of the stadium. Endeavor let out a triumphant shout, but Todoroki wasn't looking at his father. He was looking at Franklin, who was standing in the center of the inferno, his gym uniform singed, but his skin untouched. Franklin smiled. He reached out and snapped his fingers. The fire didn't go out. Instead, it transformed. The orange flames turned into a swirling galaxy of harmless, glowing sparks that drifted upward like embers from a celestial bonfire. The heat vanished, replaced by a gentle, soothing warmth. Todoroki stood there, panting, his left side still smoking, looking at the beauty Franklin had created from his rage. "That," Franklin said, "was a hero's fire. Now, let's finish this properly." Franklin didn't use his power to win. He stepped out of the ring, voluntarily forfeiting the match. He had seen what he needed to see. He had helped a friend find himself, and in doing so, he had avoided the podium. But as he walked into the tunnel, he saw a news report on a nearby monitor. In Hosu City, a dark figure with a long blade stood over a fallen hero. The hero killer, Stain, had seen the festival. He had seen the godchild of UA, and he had found his next target. The transition from the bright lights of the sports festival to the damp, claustrophobic alleys of Hosu City was jarring, even for a boy who had walked between dimensions. Franklin Richards had chosen to intern with a mid-tier hero agency, a tactical move to avoid the prying eyes of Endeavor or the heavy expectations of All Might. He wanted to learn the street-level reality of being a hero, the quiet work that didn't involve stadium cheers. But reality had a way of finding Franklin, especially when he was trying to hide from it. Hosu was burning. The League of Villains had unleashed a new batch of Nomu, their screeches echoing off the glass skyscrapers. But Franklin wasn't looking at the monsters. He was looking at Tenya Ida. He had seen the look in the class rep's eyes back at the station, a cold, brittle glassiness that spoke of vengeance for his brother, Ingenium. Franklin had followed him into the shadows, his feet making no sound on the wet pavement. He didn't need a map. He could feel the ripples of intent in the air, the jagged edge of a murderous will clashing with a desperate, youthful rage. In a narrow alleyway, slick with trash and stagnant water, Franklin found them. Ida was pinned to the ground, a jagged blade held over his throat by a man who looked like a nightmare, woven from old bandages and spite. The hero killer, Stain, stood over his prey, his long tongue flickering as he tasted the blood on his blade. The pro-hero, Native, lay slumped against the wall, paralyzed and bleeding. "You are not a hero," Stain rasped, his voice sounding like two stones grinding together. "You are a child playing at justice to sate a petty grudge. You are a cancer on this society, just like the rest of them. Only the worthy should wear the name." "Shut up!" Ida screamed, tears of frustration mixing with the rain on his face. "He was my brother. He was a great hero. You have no right." "I have the only right," Stain countered, raising his sword. "The right of the righteous." "That's a very heavy word to throw around in an alleyway," Franklin said, stepping out from the shadows. Stain froze. He didn't turn his head immediately. He tilted his ear, as if listening to the frequency of Franklin's voice. "I saw you at the festival. The boy who didn't want to win. The child who toys with the laws of the world." "I don't toy with them," Franklin said, his hands in his pockets. He felt the fuses in his mind beginning to thrum. The presence of Stain was different from the Nomu. The Nomu was a biological mess, but Stain was a concentrated spike of human conviction. It was terrifyingly pure. "I'm just trying to make sure everyone gets home tonight." "Let him go, Stain." Stain turned, his red eyes gleaming with a manic fervor. "You are the ultimate blasphemy, Franklin Richards. You possess the power of a god, yet you lack the spirit of a martyr. You use your gifts to hide, to pretend you are one of these pretenders. You are a false idol. If a god does not serve the truth, he must be cast down." Stain moved. He was a blur of ragged fabric and steel, his speed aided by a quirk that seemed to sharpen his very existence. He didn't go for a killing blow. He went for a scratch. One drop of blood was all he needed for his quirk, blood curdle. Franklin didn't dodge. He stood still as the blade whistled toward his cheek. But the metal never touched skin. In the microsecond before impact, Franklin subconsciously adjusted the density of the air around him. The sword hit a wall of atmospheric pressure, so solid, it rang like a bell. The vibration traveled up Stain's arm, nearly shattering his elbow. "My blood isn't like yours," Franklin said softly. "It's complicated. I don't think your quirk would like it." Stain snarled, leaping back, his body coiled like a spring. "Then I will have to cut deeper." "Richards!" "Run!" Ida gasped, still unable to move. "He's too fast. Don't let him touch you." Franklin looked at Ida, then back at Stain. He could end this. He could blink and Stain would be in a jail cell in another city, or he could rewrite the alleyway so the walls simply closed in on the killer. But he remembered Aizawa's warning. If he used that kind of power here, in the middle of a crowded city, the ripple would be catastrophic. He had to be a hero, not a force of nature. Franklin lunged forward. For the first time, he used his reality warping to augment his physical combat. He didn't just punch. He shortened the distance of his swing so that his fist reached Stain's chest before the muscle had even fully contracted. It was impossible speed, but grounded in a physical form. Stain dodged with a feral instinct, his blades dancing a lethal pattern in the air. The fight was a symphony of sparks and shadows. Stain was a master of the blade, using every trick of the environment. But Franklin was the environment. When Stain tried to leap off a wall, Franklin made the brickwork as soft as sponge, robbing the killer of his momentum. When Stain threw his daggers, Franklin made the gravity around the blades 10 times heavier, causing them to plummet harmlessly to the ground. "Why?" Stain hissed, pinned against the wall by a sudden invisible weight. "Why do you struggle to be human? You could reshape this rotten world. You could purge the fakes with a thought. Why do you let them lead you?" "Because," Franklin said, standing over him, his eyes glowing with a faint, steady light. "Being a hero isn't about being right. It's about being there. It's about the person who's scared and does it anyway. You aren't a hero, Stain. You're just a man who's lost his way in his own head." Franklin reached out, intending to knock Stain unconscious with a localized burst of kinetic energy. But as his hand moved, a gout of fire erupted from the entrance of the alley. Endeavor, the flame hero, had arrived, his face a mask of professional fury. "Step back, student!" Endeavor roared, a lance of fire aimed at Stain. In the chaos, Stain found a moment of opening. He threw a hidden serrated needle, not at Franklin, but at the paralyzed Ida. It was a distraction, a test of Franklin's priorities. Franklin didn't hesitate. He ignored Stain. He turned and caught the needle an inch from Ida's eye, his fingers glowing with a protective blue field. By the time he looked back, Stain was gone, swallowed by the smoke of Endeavor's flames, leaving only a tattered piece of his scarf behind. Later, as the medics loaded Ida and Native into ambulances, Franklin stood in the rain, his uniform soaked. Endeavor approached him, his flames dimmed to a low simmer. "You had him," Endeavor said, his voice unusually quiet. "I saw you move, Richards. You were holding back. You could have ended the hero killer right there. Why did you protect the boy instead of finishing the target?" Franklin looked at the number 2 hero. "Because Ida is my friend. Stain is just a problem. I'll solve the problem later. My friends come first." Endeavor grunted, a sound that might have been respect or frustration. "You have the power of a king, but the heart of a sentimentalist. Be careful, boy. The world won't always give you a choice between the two." As the police sirens wailed in the distance, Franklin felt a cold shiver. He had survived Stain's judgment, but he knew the hero killer was right about one thing. He was a false idol. He was pretending to be a student while carrying the weight of a universe. And as he looked up at the moon, he saw a black speck crossing its surface, a winged Nomu heading toward the center of the city. The night was far from over, and the glitched god of Class 1A was beginning to realize that the more he tried to be a hero, the more the world demanded he be a god. The isolation of the Beast's Forest was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where the students of Class 1A could push their quirks to the breaking point, far from the prying eyes of the media. For Franklin Richards, the deep, ancient silence of the mountains was a relief. Here, the hum of the world was quieter, the vibrations of millions of minds replaced by the rhythmic rustle of leaves and the distant rush of waterfalls. But as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon on the third night of the training camp, the silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like a bated breath. Franklin stood on a ridge overlooking the camp, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his track pants. Next to him, a small, sullen boy named Coda sat on a rock, staring at the ground with a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. Coda hated heroes. He hated quirks. And most of all, he seemed to hate Franklin, whom he viewed as the ultimate personification of the superpowered nonsense that had killed his parents. "You're just like the rest of them," Coda muttered, kicking a loose pebble into the ravine. "Showing off. Acting like you're better, because you can make things happen by thinking about them. It's disgusting." Franklin didn't look away from the forest. "I don't think I'm better, Coda. To be honest, most days I'd give anything to just be a kid who's good at math or plays the piano. My power isn't a trophy. It's a wall between me and everyone else. Every time I use it, I'm reminded that I don't quite belong in the world I'm trying to save." "Then don't use it," Coda snapped. "Just stop." "I wish I could," Franklin whispered, "but the world doesn't stop." At that moment, the air changed. To Franklin's cosmic awareness, it felt like a drop of ink falling into a glass of clear water. A thick, acrid scent of burnt pine and chemical ozone wafted up from the forest floor. Below them, a pillar of blue flame erupted, scorching the night sky. The Vanguard Action Squad had arrived. "Coda, get behind me," Franklin said, his voice losing its youthful softness and gaining a hard, metallic edge. From the shadows of the trees, a mountain of a man stepped out. His skin was a lattice of scarred muscle, his left eye replaced by a mechanical prosthetic that whirred as it locked onto Franklin. This was Muscular, a high-tier killer who lived for the thrill of the slaughter. "Found you," Muscular grinned, his voice a low, wet growl. The boss said the explosive brat was the priority, but he also said if we found the reality anchor, we should bring him in, even if we have to break every bone in his body to do it. "You aren't bringing anyone anywhere," Franklin said. Muscular laughed, his muscle fibers swelling and erupting from his skin like a nest of angry snakes. He lunged, a mass of several tons of raw power moving with the speed of a freight train. In the Marvel universe, Franklin might have simply unmade the man, but here, the fuses in his mind were screaming. The air was already thick with the quirks of other villains. Mustard's gas, Dobby's fire, Moonfish's blades. The local reality was becoming brittle. If Franklin hit Muscular with a full-scale reality collapse, he might accidentally trigger a chain reaction that would detonate the quirks of every student in the forest. He had to fight small. As Muscular's fist descended, Franklin didn't move. He didn't use a shield. Instead, he reached out and touched the vibrating air. He subconsciously shifted the vector of impact. When Muscular's fist struck the space in front of Franklin, the force didn't move forward. It folded back on itself. The shockwave of Muscular's own strength rippled through his arm, shattering his humerus and sending him stumbling back in a daze of agony. What did you do?" Muscular gasped, his muscle fibers twitching uncontrollably. "I didn't do anything," Franklin said, his eyes beginning to glow with a faint, dangerous violet light. "You just hit yourself with the weight of your own choices." But Franklin's attention was diverted. Through the trees, he saw a black marble fly through the air, capturing Katsuki Bakugo. He saw Mr. Compress, the showman villain, dancing away toward the clearing where the black warp gate was opening. "Richards, help him!" Midoriya's voice echoed through the woods. The green-haired boy was battered, his arms shattered from his own fight with Muscular, but he was still running, still trying to save his friend. Franklin looked at Koda, then at the clearing. He could be there in a millisecond. He could rewrite the distance so that Bakugo was back in his arms. But as he prepared to leap, a voice crackled through a stolen radio on Muscular's belt. It was the calm, chilling voice of All for One, broadcast from a distant location. "Do not let the anchor move, Shigaraki. If he enters the warp gate's vicinity, his resonance will collapse the portal, capture the boy, or kill the world he stands on." Suddenly, the forest floor beneath Franklin's feet turned to liquid. A villain he hadn't seen, someone with a molecular destabilization quirk, was working in tandem with Dabby. A ring of blue fire, 20 feet high, circled Franklin and Koda, the heat so intense it began to ionize the very air. "They're not just after Bakugo," Franklin realized, his heart hammering against his ribs. "They're using Bakugo to bait the heroes, but they're using this fire to keep me pinned. They know. They know I'm afraid of what happens if I go 100%. Franklin looked at Koda, who was hyperventilating, the heat of the blue flames singeing the boy's hat. Franklin looked at Midoriya, who was desperately reaching for the marble containing Bakugo, only to have it snatched away at the last second. The fuses in Franklin's mind began to smoke. He felt the familiar, terrifying pull of his true power, the ability to simply say no to the blue fire, no to the villains, and no to the distance. But as he reached for it, he saw the sky beginning to fracture again. The purple cracks were larger this time, leaking a strange white light that didn't belong in this universe. The quirk singularity wasn't just a theory, it was a physical pressure he could feel pressing against the back of his skull. "Koda, close your eyes," Franklin commanded. "Why?" "Because I'm going to have to be a god for a second, and it's not going to be pretty." Franklin didn't use his power to attack, he used it to contain. He reached out with both hands and grabbed the blue fire. To the observers, it looked like he was molding clay. He pulled the flames inward, compressing the massive wall of heat into a tiny, harmless sphere of blue light no larger than a marble. He then did the same to the air, creating a vacuum pocket that extinguished the fire and silenced the forest in a single, deafening whump. But the effort cost him. Franklin collapsed to one knee, blood trickling from his nose. His fuses hadn't just blown, they had melted. The physical toll of suppressing his own godhood while performing a high-level reality manipulation was causing his internal organs to protest. He looked up just in time to see the warp gate close. Bakugo was gone. The forest was silent, save for the crackling of dying embers and the distant cries of his wounded classmates. Franklin Richards, the boy who could create universes, had been outmaneuvered by a man who understood the one thing Franklin didn't: that the greatest weakness of a god is his own conscience. All for One hadn't needed to beat Franklin, he just needed to make Franklin afraid of himself. As the pro-heroes finally arrived, led by a frantic Vlad King and a grim-faced Eraserhead, Franklin stood up, wiping the blood from his lip. He didn't look like a student anymore. He looked like a storm that had been temporarily tethered to the earth. "They took him," Midoriya sobbed, falling to the ground. "They took Kachan." Franklin walked over and placed a hand on Midoriya's shoulder. His touch didn't feel like a classmate's, it felt like the weight of an entire galaxy. "They didn't just take him, Izuku. They stole the sun. But they forgot one thing." "What?" Midoriya looked up, his eyes red and blurry. "I can find anything in the dark." Franklin's eyes flared with a cold, absolute white light. The fuses were gone, and for the first time since arriving in this world, the boy from New York was done playing by the rules of the Quirk registry. The city of Yokohama did not feel like a battlefield. It felt like a funeral pyre waiting for a spark. As Franklin Richards stood on the roof of a building, overlooking the Camino Ward warehouse district, the air was so heavy, with the scent of ozone and fear, that it tasted like copper on his tongue. Next to him, Izuku Midoriya, Kirishima Ida, Momo and Todoroki were huddled in disguises, their hearts hammering a frantic rhythm that Franklin could feel through the very soles of his shoes. They were here for Bakugo, but Franklin knew he was here for something else. He was here to face the man who had turned his friends' lives into a game of chess. "We have to move now," Midoriya whispered, his eyes locked on the warehouse where the League's trackers had led them. "Before All Might arrives. Once the pros start the raid, the villains will panic. That's our only window to grab Kachan." Franklin didn't look at the warehouse. He looked at the sky. To his unfiltered eyes, the stars weren't just points of light. They were the distant witnesses to a reality that was beginning to fray at the edges. "Go," Franklin said, his voice eerily calm. "I'll make sure the window stays open." As the pro-heroes, led by All Might and Endeavor, launched their surgical strike on the Nomu factory and the League's hideout, the world seemed to explode in a symphony of violence. But the victory was short-lived. A black liquid, smelling of old blood and ink, began to erupt from the mouths of the heroes and the villains alike. It was a forced warp gate, more powerful than anything Kurogiri had ever manifested. In a heartbeat, the battlefield shifted. The warehouse was leveled not by a hero, but by the arrival of a man in a black suit, wearing a life support mask that hissed with every breath. All for One. Franklin watched from the shadows as the symbol of evil systematically dismantled the pro-heroes with a casual flick of his wrist. He saw All Might crash into the earth, the dust of the city rising like a shroud around him. He saw his classmates frozen in terror, hiding behind a wall, paralyzed by the sheer, suffocating pressure of All for One's presence. It was a malevolence so absolute it felt like a black hole, drawing all hope into its center. "He's not a man," Kirishima choked out, his skin hardening instinctively. He's something else." Franklin stepped forward, out from behind the cover of the ruins. "Richards." "No," Ida hissed, reaching for his arm. "What are you doing? We have to stick to the plan." "The plan was built for a world where he plays by the rules," Franklin said, not looking back. "He doesn't, so I'm not going to either." Franklin didn't run. He didn't use a quirk. He simply decided that he was the center of the world. As he walked toward the clearing where All Might was struggling to stand, the atmosphere around Franklin began to ripple. The disguise he had been wearing, a cheap wig and glasses, simply dissolved into light, revealing the boy from another world. But he wasn't just a boy anymore. The fuses he had spent months building to limit his power were gone, replaced by a radiant, terrifying clarity. All for One paused, his mask tilting toward Franklin. "Ah, the anchor. I wondered when you would stop hiding behind the skirts of your teachers. You see it, don't you, child? This world is a delicate thing. It is a garden of flickering candles, and I am the wind. But you are the fire that could consume the whole forest." "I'm not fire," Franklin said, his voice echoing with a crystalline resonance that silenced the roar of the fires around them. "I'm the one who decides if the wind gets to blow." All for One laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Then show me," Show me the power that makes Sensei tremble in his dreams. Give me the quirk that transcends the singularity. All for One lunged. He combined 6 different kinetic enhancement quirks with 4 strength multipliers, his arms swelling into a grotesque mountain of bone and muscle. He struck with enough force to level a mountain range. Franklin didn't dodge. He raised a single hand. When the impact occurred, there was no sound. There was no shockwave. Instead, the space where All for One's fist met Franklin's palm simply turned into a localized vacuum. The colors of the world inverted for a split second, the sky turning a sickly violet, the fires turning a frozen silver. Franklin wasn't blocking the blow. He was deleting the kinetic energy of the attack before it could manifest. "Is that all?" Franklin asked. The sky above Camino Ward began to fracture. Great jagged fissures of white light tore through the clouds, revealing a void that wasn't space, but the raw, unformed data of reality itself. The quirk singularity was no longer a theory. Franklin's presence at this power level was pulling the thin physics of the MHA universe apart. "Richard, stop!" All Might cried out, coughing up blood as he watched the sky break. "You'll destroy the city! You'll destroy everything!" Franklin looked at All Might, then at his terrified friends. He saw Bakugo, who had been launched into the air by Midoriya's desperate rescue plan. Franklin reached out with his mind. He didn't use telekinesis. He simply corrected Bakugo's trajectory. The boy, who was falling toward the villains, suddenly found the air beneath his feet as solid as a staircase. Bakugo sprinted across the invisible path, reaching Midoriya and Kirishima in a blur of motion. With his friends safe, Franklin turned back to All for One. He felt the immense pull of the void above them. He knew that if he stayed at this level for another minute, the Earth would turn into a pocket dimension of his own making, and everyone he loved would become nothing more than thoughts in his head. "You want my power?" Franklin whispered, his eyes now twin suns of absolute white. "Here, take a look at what it actually is." Franklin reached into All for One's mind. He didn't attack the man's body. He showed him the scale. He showed the villain the birth of galaxies, the heat death of universes, and the crushing weight of 1,000,000,000 years of solitude. He showed him that All for One was a petty, microscopic ambition in a multiverse that didn't even know his name. All for One screamed. It wasn't a sound of physical pain, but of a mind being forcibly expanded beyond its capacity. The villain collapsed to his knees, his life support mask cracking, his stolen quirks flickering in and out of existence like dying light bulbs. But Franklin was at his limit too. His physical body was beginning to translucent, his atoms struggling to maintain a cohesive form in a reality that couldn't support his mass. He had to finish this without shattering the world. He pulled the power back. He grabbed the fractures in the sky and sewed them shut with a thought, the violet light fading back into the dark blue of the night. He forced his heart to beat at a human rhythm, the fuses snapping back into place with a mental agony that made him gasp for air. Franklin fell to the ground, his skin pale and cold. All Might, seeing his opening, gathered the last embers of One for All. "Thank you, young Richards," All Might whispered, his arm glowing with a final, desperate gold light. "I'll take it from here." Franklin watched through blurry eyes as All Might delivered the United States of Smash. He saw the symbol of peace stand victorious one last time, his fist raised in the air as his power finally flickered out. The world cheered. The cameras broadcasted the victory to every corner of the globe, and All for One was finally taken into custody. But as the medics rushed toward them, Franklin didn't look at the cameras. He looked at his hands, which were still slightly vibrating with the echoes of the void. He had saved the day, but he had revealed the truth. The world now knew that in Class 1A, there sat a boy who didn't just have a powerful quirk. They knew there was a creator among them. And in the shadows of the hospital, where the villains were being taken, and in the secret labs of the government, the question was no longer, who is the next #1 hero? The question was, how do we control a god? The aftermath of Camino Ward was not a time of celebration, but a period of profound, shivering silence. The symbol of peace was gone, and in his place stood a boy whose mere existence made the Hero Public Safety Commission lose sleep. Franklin Richards was no longer just a student of Class 1A. He was a state-level variable. While the students moved into the newly constructed Heights Alliance dorms, Franklin found his room shadowed not by posters of heroes, but by the invisible weight of government eyes. Every time he manifested a sandwich or floated a book to his desk, He could feel the sensors in the walls recording the spike in local reality density. "They're afraid of me, Izuku," Franklin said one evening, sitting on the steps of the dorm with Midoriya. The air around them was cool, the crickets chirping in a rhythmic, grounding pattern that Franklin found himself focusing on just to stay anchored. "I can feel the Commission's agents in the woods. They aren't looking for villains. They're looking at the anchor." Midoriya, his arms still scarred from the training camp and Kamino, looked at Franklin with a mix of sympathy and resolve. "They don't understand that you're just you." "But Richards, after what you did to All for One, the scale of it wasn't just a quirk. It was like you were showing us the blueprint of the world and then changing the ink." "I just wanted to help," Franklin whispered. "But I think I'm making the world too loud." The loudness reached a crescendo during the Shie Hasaikai investigation. Franklin had been assigned to the task force alongside Midoriya, Kirishima, and Uraraka, working under the pro-hero Naitai. The mission was to rescue a young girl named Eri from the clutches of Kai Chisaki, known as Overhaul. When the team first encountered the girl in that dark alleyway, small, trembling, her arms wrapped in bandages, Franklin felt a resonance he hadn't expected. Eri didn't have a quirk, she had a glitch, much like his own. Her rewind was a biological reality warp, a localized reversal of time's arrow. As the raid on the Hasaikai stronghold began, the underground corridors became a labyrinth of shifting concrete and distorted geometry. Overhaul was using his quirk to disassemble and reassemble the very earth, turning the basement into a churning sea of stone. Franklin moved through the chaos with a grim, surgical precision. He didn't use flashy blasts, he simply denied the walls the ability to move when Chisaki tried to crush them. He walked through the stone as if it were water, his presence stabilizing the shifting tunnels for the heroes behind him. When Franklin finally reached the central chamber, he saw Overhaul standing over a terrified Eri. Chisaki looked at Franklin, his eyes narrowing behind his plague mask. He didn't see a hero, he saw a biological impurity that defied his understanding of the world. "You," Chisaki hissed, his voice echoing in the vaulted room. "The one they call the anchor. You're the ultimate sickness. You aren't an evolution, you're a tumor on the natural order. You rewrite the world because you're too arrogant to live in the one that exists." "I'm not the one hurting a child to make a point, Chisaki," Franklin replied. Franklin stepped forward, and Chisaki lunged, his hand touching the floor. The ground erupted into thousands of jagged spikes, a forest of stone intended to shred Franklin at the molecular level. But as the spikes reached Franklin's event horizon, the 6-inch space where his will was absolute, they didn't break. They turned into flower petals. A blizzard of cherry blossoms filled the room, falling softly onto the blood-stained floor. "How?" Chisaki screamed, his hands glowing as he tried to disassemble the very air. "I am the master of reconstruction. I control the state of matter." "You control the what?" Franklin said, his eyes beginning to glow with that terrifying, steady white light. "I control the is. You're trying to edit a book while I'm holding the pen." Franklin reached out and scooped Eri into his arms. As he held her, he felt the terrifying, chaotic thrum of her power. Her rewind was leaking out, trying to undo his very existence, to turn him back into a baby, then into nothing. But Franklin didn't fight her. He wrapped her in a stasis field, a pocket of reality where time simply didn't exist. For the first time in her life, Eri felt the screaming in her blood stop. She looked up at Franklin, her large red eyes filled with a wonder that broke his heart. "It's quiet," she whispered. "I know," Franklin said. But in that moment, as he held Eri, a dark thought flickered through Franklin's mind, a temptation born of godhood. He looked at the girl, then at the broken world around them. He saw the scars on Midoriya's arms, the trauma in Eri's eyes, and the looming threat of the quirk singularity that threatened to destroy this reality. I could fix it, he thought. The fuses in his mind began to hum with a seductive heat. I could use Eri as a catalyst. With my power and her rewind, I could reset the Earth to a time before quirks. I could make everyone normal. No more monsters like Overhaul. No more targets on kids' backs. No more lonely gods. The air in the room began to vibrate. The petals on the floor began to glow. A purple rift started to open in the center of the chamber. Not out of anger, but out of a desperate, misplaced compassion. Franklin was on the verge of performing a global correction. "Richards, look at her." It was Lemillion. Mirio Togata. The senior student was leaning against a wall, his quirk gone, his body riddled with holes from the Hasaikai's bullets. Yet he was still smiling. He was still a hero, even without his power. "She's not a tool for the world, Franklin," Mirio shouted through the pain. "She's just a girl. You can't decide her future just because you're afraid of yours." The rift in the air snapped shut. Franklin gasped, his knees hitting the stone floor as he hugged Eri tighter. The white light in his eyes faded, replaced by the stinging heat of human tears. He had almost done it. He had almost become the very thing Stain and All for One had accused him of being, a tyrant who mistook his own desires for justice. "I'm sorry," Franklin whispered into Eri's hair. "I'm so sorry." Overhaul, seeing Franklin's moment of weakness, fused himself with one of his subordinates, becoming a multi-armed titan of flesh and rock. He lunged at them with a roar of pure, nihilistic hatred. But Franklin didn't even look up. He didn't need to. Midoriya was there, having used Eri's power to unlock 100% of One for All. The green-haired boy became a blur of blue light and sheer, unadulterated willpower, delivering a punch that didn't just break Overhaul, it rewrote the air itself. As the raid concluded, and the dust settled, Franklin stood outside the Hasaikai compound, watching the ambulances pull away. He had saved Eri, but he had lost a piece of his own innocence. He realized that as long as he stayed in this world, he would always be one bad day away from becoming its destroyer. The Hero Society was a fragile ecosystem, and he was an apex predator trying to pretend he was a herbivore. Night Eye, the man who could see the future, looked at Franklin before he was loaded onto a stretcher. The pro-hero's eyes were filled with a profound, weary sadness. "I saw many futures today, young Richards," Night Eye whispered. "In most of them, the world ends in light. But in the one where we win, you're not there. You're somewhere else, being happy." "I hope so, sir," Franklin said. But as the sun rose over the city, Franklin felt a cold, familiar prickle on his neck. In the darkness of his prison cell in Tartarus, All for One was smiling. The villain had felt the ripple of Franklin's near collapse. He knew that the anchor was drifting, and as the Paranormal Liberation Front began to gather its forces in the shadows, the war for the future was no longer about heroes versus villains. It was about whether the world could survive the moment Franklin Richards finally decided to say goodbye. The final battlefield was not a city, but a graveyard of ideals. The Paranormal Liberation War had reached its catastrophic zenith on the floating ruins of what was once a mountain fortress. Below, the earth was a scarred wasteland of decayed concrete and blue fire, but above, the sky had become a kaleidoscope of impossible colors. The Quirk singularity, the theoretical point where human biology could no longer contain its own evolution, was no longer a theory. It was happening. Because of Franklin Richards' presence, the thin physics of this reality were finally snapping. Heroes and villains alike found their powers fluctuating wildly. Fire turned to ice, gravity reversed without warning, and the very air tasted of ancient, dormant memories. In the center of the storm stood Tomura Shigaraki, his body a terrifying tapestry of forced evolution, his eyes burning with the dual consciousness of himself and All for One. He was no longer just a man, he was a void, a living hunger that sought to consume the anchor and use Franklin's reality-warping power to reset the world into a primordial chaos where only the strong, only he, would exist. "Do you feel it, Franklin?" Shigaraki's voice was a discordant harmony of two souls. "The world is screaming. It's tired of being logical. It's tired of being small. Your father's science and All Might's peace were just bandages on a dying god. Give me your hand, and we will let the singularity finish what it started." Franklin Richards stood opposite him, his UA uniform tattered, his skin glowing with a soft, bioluminescent white light. He looked at his friends, Midoriya, Bakugo, and Todoroki, who were barely holding on, their quirks straining against the atmospheric instability. He saw the terror in their eyes, not of the villains, but of the world itself coming apart. He realized then that he was the cause. His subconscious wish to live in a world of heroes had brought a cosmic-level mass into a system designed for human-level weights. He was the extra weight that was sinking the ship. "My dad once told me that the greatest power isn't the ability to change the world," Franklin said, his voice quiet but carrying over the roar of the dimensional winds. "It's the ability to know when to stop. You want to be a god, Shigaraki." But I've been a god my whole life. It's lonely, it's heavy, and it's a lie. Being a hero, that's what's real. All for One's influence surged. Arrogant child! You would deny the evolution of the species for the sake of a few friends? I will tear the power from your soul. Shigaraki lunged, his hand outstretched to deliver a decay that would have unmade the planet's crust. But Franklin didn't flinch. For the first time, he didn't just blow his fuses, he dismantled them. He allowed the full, terrifying majesty of the Richards legacy to flood through his nervous system. The sky didn't just fracture, it opened. The fantastic reality of his home universe began to bleed through, a golden light that smelled of old books, laboratory ozone, and a mother's hug. Franklin met Shigaraki's hand with his own. The impact didn't cause an explosion, it caused a correction. Franklin didn't fight Shigaraki's decay with destruction, he fought it with existence. He poured the infinite energy of 1,000 pocket universes into the Quirk singularity. He wasn't just stabilizing Shigaraki, he was stabilizing every human being on Earth. He reached into the genetic code of the Quirk factor itself and anchored it. He wove a web of cosmic energy through the planet's collective DNA, providing the buffer that the human race lacked. He gave the world the strength to survive its own evolution. No! All for One's voice shrieked as his consciousness was forcibly pushed back by the sheer, overwhelming light of Franklin's will. This power, it's too much. You're burning it all away. I'm not burning it, Franklin whispered, his form beginning to dissolve into pure light. I'm giving it back. With a final, silent pulse of iridescent energy, the singularity collapsed. The violet cracks in the sky snapped shut. The blue fires died. The distorted geometry of the fortress returned to the laws of Euclidean math. Shigaraki fell to the ground, his body reverting to its human state. The malevolent ghost of All for One finally silenced by the sheer scale of the Richards correction. But the price was paid. Franklin fell to his knees, his eyes no longer glowing, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The white light was gone. He reached out and touched the ground, feeling the rough, cold texture of the stone. For the first time in his life, the hum of the universe was gone. He couldn't feel the atoms vibrating. He couldn't see the lines of probability. He looked at his hands and saw only skin and bone. Richards! Midoriya scrambled over the rubble, his eyes wide with terror. He reached out, his hand trembling. Franklin, are you? What did you do? Franklin looked up and smiled. It was a tired, human smile. I used it all, Izuku. All of it. To anchor the world, I had to use the anchor as the weight. I'm just Franklin now. You're quirkless? Bakugo asked, standing a few feet away, his face uncharacteristically pale. Worse, Franklin chuckled, coughing a bit of dust. I'm normal. I think I might even be bad at math now. The war was over. The Paranormal Liberation Front was broken, its leaders captured or scattered. But the world was changed. The Richards stabilization had fundamentally altered the nature of quirks. They were still there, still powerful, but the existential threat of the singularity had been postponed for 10,000 years. The world had been given a second chance at being human. Months later, at the UA graduation ceremony, Franklin Richards stood among his classmates. He wasn't the top of the class anymore. Without his reality warping, he had to study twice as hard as anyone else. He didn't have a flashy hero name, but as he looked at the big three of 1A, Midoriya, Bakugo, and Todoroki, he saw that they were no longer looking at him with fear. They were looking at him with love. He had come to this world to find a place where the extraordinary was ordinary. He had found something better. He had found a place where a god could choose to be a man, and where a man could choose to be a hero. As the sun set over the rebuilt city of Musutafu, Franklin looked up at the sky. It was just a sky, blue, vast, and silent. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. Conclusion. The story of Franklin Richards in the world of My Hero Academia didn't end with a cosmic throne, but with a desk in a classroom. His sacrifice didn't just defeat All for One. It redefined the destiny of an entire species. By weaving his infinite potential into the finite limits of the quirk factor, he became the silent foundation upon which the new age of heroes was built. The glitched god became the human anchor, a living testament to the idea that true power isn't about what you can do, but what you are willing to give up for others. Though Franklin now lives as a normal young man, his legacy is visible in every stabilized quirk and every child who no longer fears their own reflection. He proved that even in a world of titans and symbols, the most heroic act of all is simply choosing to belong. The boy who could create universes found his greatest joy in the one he saved, proving that reality isn't something you rewrite, it's something you share. The journey of the Richards family continues in other worlds, but here, in the heart of UA, Franklin Richards is exactly where he wants to be: home.